good? People that don't know us because we aged out.
Yeah.
But I'm Mylan Gray. I use he, him, they, them pronouns. I graduated in 2015, and I'm a junior at Stanford.
My name is Dasia. I graduated in 15 as well. I go to UMKC, and this is my third year. I'm always excited to come back and see what Sumner's debate team is up to because we definitely left our mark, so it's not nice to see the legacy continue.
So Ms. Brown hit us up and was like, can you all, when you come to visit, can you give a K lecture? And so Dasia and I are going to give two different perspectives on Ks. I'm a person that I think like the summer before my junior year, I went to a debate camp where I first started to learn about critiques, came back and was completely K crazy, and that I didn't want to run anything that wasn't a KF, or wasn't some sort of form that would indict debate as we know it in the traditional policy.
I had critical arguments, but I was always kind of scared of the K because it was just like a lot going on, so it always kind of made me nervous. But I did start to learn more about critiques and the way that they're run and things like the critical arguments that you can attach to. So it's exciting kind of getting a little bit more exposure, even though that was towards the end of my high school debate career. And going to, where do we go to Novel with this one, forcing me into all the K's, and I was like, okay, I'm going to have to get on board, so I did.
So the best place to start anytime you're trying to learn something is to start with what you already know. You all aren't blank slates here for us to impart our aged wisdom about K's and all of the other non-traditional arguments. So first I kind of want to pop up, tell us a little bit about what you know about K's, what you think they are, what they look like, what they make you feel, what you think they make the judge feel. Tell us your experiences with critiques.
I'll pick on Simone first. Okay. We just started running a K last tournament. That's my first experience with them, really, as something I've run. They're fun for me. They seem a lot more like real world, to use a very kind of the word that's been thrown at me a lot. Like they do genuinely seem more like they're actually addressing what's happening in the world and drawing people into that kind of discussion, and that seems like that's kind of what's going past it.
What critique did you run? What K did you run?
We're doing a neoliberalism K.
Okay. It's a good starter. Definitely a good starter.
Who else has, raise your hand if you've ran a K, whether in practice or in a tournament. Anybody else that has like experience, whether it be not necessarily having run it, but you've read a critique, you've heard about it, you've listened to someone else run a critique, you've seen Simone run a critique in practice. Raise your hand if you're. I've got like, I've witnessed a critique and it doesn't seem like this.
I've watched critiques. I think it was Anthony.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was at the debate camp I went to this summer.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know about K's. You were there.
Oh, DKC's camp?
Yeah.
Where are you on KC?
No, DKC. At UMKC.
Anybody else?
Maybe you watched Browns last year with Michael and Royal.
Yeah. What's her name?
Neymar.
Neymar. Sweet. She was there. You have as well? Yeah. Okay. What was your experience when you saw this critique? Tell us the story of this critique or critiques.
Well, at our last tournament, there were kids who were running critiques against us. You can tell they didn't know what they were doing. But from what I've heard, well, what I've like, while listening to it, it sounded complicated and like kind of hard to understand. So,
Big words being thrown around.
Do you remember what critique you ran? Poverty critique of the word poverty, or so. Yeah. Anybody else want to hop into the discussion about their experiences with kids?
That makes judges angry in my experience. Like not even in my
experience.
Watching the other seniors from last year do Ks, they would always come back with these stories of like the other team either completely mishandled like the K that itself and refused to discuss it, or the judge would like pull it aside and get angry. So,
Dasia, do you want to talk about your experiences with Ks? Like, no, actually, can you talk about what was that tournament? Or just talk about any of your rounds, whether they be good or bad.
Oh, okay. That was, I should remember that. Okay. So, my first experience with the K, Yeah, Latara's awesome. She's my debate partner. But I'm pretty sure we were at Waru, and we had made it to the final round. So we were really excited because we did great all day. Like, we were about to go against this team. It was going to be great. And they sped read like 7 different arguments, including like 2 Ks. And I looked at her and I said, I can't do this. Like, I physically, I'm not going to do this. And don't do this ever, because this is not a good thing to do. But we got up and left the round. We were like, turned around and said, you can vote for them. We're going to leave. And it was a very scary experience. And looking back on it, obviously, I wish that we hadn't have taken it that way, because looking at our flows, their arguments weren't complete at all. So, like, one of the biggest things that I want to tell you all is don't have this fear that, just because they're running a critique, they know what they're talking about, and that it's a complete argument, because there are specific things that you have to have when you run a critique, and there's a thorough way that you have to run it and a thorough way that you have to answer it. So I want you all to know that just because somebody's running a critique, that doesn't mean they're smarter than you. That doesn't mean that they know more about debate than you do. It's just really about breaking apart each piece of that argument and understanding it. So my first experience wasn't that great, but I took that opportunity to make it a learning experience after the tournament, and me and my partner both went on and learned about critiques and the way that you run them and different kinds that there are. So it ended up being a positive thing, even though we ended up taking second instead of first because we all got the round.
So it's important to share these stories about what experiences we've had with critiques before we hop into it. Because all of you at one point or another in your debate career, you're going to face critiques. And you'll have these experiences where it's something that's coming at you very fast. People are reading very large words at you. You don't know what's happening in the round. And as debaters, especially for our 2As out there, we like to feel in control of the situation. We like to know exactly what we're hitting. We like to have the cards prepared. We like to know what they're saying to us. We like to especially know what to say to them in order to win. And when critiques come into the mix, it's this thing that throws us off our game. It makes us want to leave rounds. It makes us want to be angry at the other people or ourselves, because they're bringing something into us that we have a hard time engaging. Because the first thing to do when you find a critique is you have to engage it in one form or another. Engagement means that you can't ignore what the critique is saying. You can't ignore that it has relevance on the round or the arguments that you're reading. But in order to engage, you have to first know what a critique is. So critique, you can spell it a variety of different ways, but traditionally it's spelled with a K, K-R-I. There we go. You can't spell. But it's spelled this way because, like, it was one of the first critiques or a lot of the critiques that started out in the beginning were much more of, forgetting what his name is, but it's a German guy. What's his name? I don't know. I don't remember what his name is, but this was a critique that was fairly commonly ran in the debate space, and critique spelled, there aren't C's in German, so they spelled it K's. It's just a decision that they made.
A culture difference?
Yeah, it's a culture difference. But critiques are, people might have explained it to you as a diss-ad with a counterplan in one. And the way that critiques are structured are very much so like any other diss-ad or any other counterplan that you'll face. But the 3 most basic parts that you have to understand are in a critique in order to be able to break down a critique. Does anybody know the 3 parts of critique? The 3 basic parts?
Simone, do you know any of the parts?
God, I have them written up because I was picking one card from each of those subdivisions. It was the link was one of them, right? You always have a link and everything you're discussing. There was one that started with an R, wasn't there?
It depends. There can be like, I don't remember. Do you remember what the name is?
No, I don't remember any of the other ones. That's not a link. Okay. Unfortunately.
So in impacts or in the disadvantages,
you ruined the surprise.
Right. You usually have the uniqueness. You all know what uniqueness is, right?
Yeah.
You have a link, and then you have an impact. And with counterplans, you still have uniqueness, but it's called inherency. And with counterplans, you have solvency. So when you have a critique, you have three main parts to it. You drop the uniqueness because critiques are about things that have been existing existential structural problems, whether it be neoliberalism, capitalism. I'll explain what these terms are because they have very nebulous definitions, but they have the same function. Neoliberalism, capitalism, you have gender critiques, you have word critiques, you have very particular race critiques. So you might talk about Afro-pessimism, you might talk about Afrofuturism, you might talk about black feminism, you might talk about queer, you might have different critiques that attack from a queer perspective. Critiques are things that talk about social problems, generally social, structural, economic problems that we have in our society that's going to affect the way that your plan is enacted. So when we talk about rural education, for example, the implementation of funding for rural schools isn't going to go as smooth as a process as we might traditionally think, because the people that are creating these plans and the people that are implementing them are members of our society, in that they are probably going to have racist ideals embedded within the way that they think, sexist ideals. They're going to have class and gender ideals that are embedded within them, and all of these things will manifest in the way that their plan is implemented into the real world.
And these things become so normalized that a lot of times they don't realize it or don't care. So critiques take that action to say this matters, and you can't keep pushing this under the rug. And that the course of action in your plan perpetuates these ideas that we want to stay away from.
And it's people will call it more of like a social justice or a social action, because all of these critiques point to something that's a latent problem in society, and no one's doing. Well, there are a lot of people doing in terms of action to resolve these problems. But when we think about policies being implemented, when we think about politicians, when we think about the top level decisions, people aren't being as cognizant of how these ideals are influencing their plans. So critiques say, wait, we need to take a minute and examine what can be the potential effects or impacts of this plan going into a flawed world. Because the world that we think of with case debate, when we have our plans neatly played out, they're not perfect, and because the world is not perfect. So we're going to go through an example. The easiest one, and the one that everyone goes through first, is the CAPK, just because we know everyone knows a little bit about capitalism. We all live in the hub of capitalism of the world. So critiques have two different, we'll start on a basic level, but critiques have two kind of first parts. First is the link, and it functions the same way as a diss does, but you don't need a uniqueness because you don't have to go out there and say, capitalism.
This is happening now.
Capitalism is going to happen in 0.3 seconds, and we need to stop it now, or else the world's going to blow up. It's much more like a problem, like capitalism has steadily been increasing in its reach across the world, and it's eventually going to kill us. But the link is what makes capitalism relevant to the right. Because you could say capitalism is going to kill us all day and night, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have the right or it's going to give you anything to bring it into the right. If you come up and you say that rural education is something that we need to focus on, and I say, well, capitalism, Judge, you should vote for me. You're not going to get the ballot, and the other team is not going to understand. But the link is what contextualizes these very large pools of information, these schools of thought on capitalism, to the particularly relevant topic for that debate, whether it be any aspect of education, whether it be No Child Left Behind, standardized testing, or education.
So why does the affirmative team's plan link? How does it connect to this idea that we're talking about within the critique?
Is a link valid if it just explains, like, in a blanket statement, how the resolution links to a critique?
So, just like with this as, or you so just like with this as, you have non-specific links, which link in that, like, they are relevant to the round, but these non-specific links are going to be, they apply to anything. And the app's response has to be, this is a generic link.
Exactly.
Generic links are just, they do link, and you have to answer them, but they're not specific to the plan in a way that you have to worry about, like, oh, it's dead set, I'm going to trigger the impact.
And therefore, it's easier to answer a link when it's super broad and generic like that, because you can say that that yours doesn't specifically cause this to happen through whatever action you're taking.
Does just running analytics after that kind of link help?
It helps, but you should still have.
But it would still be better to have first.
Yeah, always. Like just on an argument by argument basis, whatever they bring to the table, you want to try and bring to the table. Got it. They bring analytical arguments, you should bring analytical arguments. If they bring like 14 different paragraph analytical arguments to your cards, you should try and reciprocate with something.
Yeah.
Analytical arguments would be the preference. First, secondarily would be cards. But cards as a baseline, if someone says bring the card, you should bring the card. Is this making sense? Does anyone have questions? And like, if it doesn't make sense to you, you should say it doesn't make sense. Can you explain it in a different way? We'll do that. Otherwise, we'll leave here today, go back to our regular lives. You might not understand it for it to a person. Does anyone have any questions? Sweet. So the next part is an impact, and just like this adds, the link is what triggers the impact. So if we say your plan furthers capitalism by ingraining the notion that those who score better on standardized tests are better people. Let's just use that as an example. Then your impact would say what happened as a result to our world, to society, to standardized testing, to students across the world is X, Y, Z. Whether that be we've ingrained the notion that if you work hard then you can get good scores versus the test being rigged, or we ingrain the notion that standardized testing is the holy grail to measure intelligence when it comes to getting into schools. So your link says your plan specifically exacerbates. You all know what the word exacerbates means? Exacerbates, as in makes worse, these problems of capitalism that we have in the status quo. And that is going to further trigger the impacts. And usually for capitalism, the impacts are environmental destruction. There are nuclear war, global wars. It is structural violence, because capitalism is a part of what allows racism to thrive, what allows sexism to thrive. And people will have specific impacts for it. And they can choose their impacts in ways that will turn the impacts that you have on your affirmative case and turn your advantages. But the problem with criticisms is that if you present a problem in the debate space, it's not fair to say, ha, capitalism, we're all going to die. There's no point to even passing the plan. Let's just sit and think about capitalism. No one likes to say, all right, well, we're going to die, and let's be okay with it.
Nothing to do about it, so whatever.
So that's why you have to have solvency. Solvency just means, all right, capitalism has very specific disadvantages. The affirmative plan is going to further them. What should we do in order to correct these disadvantages, or in order to resolve capitalism, to solve for capitalism? So it's called an alternative. This is the A word that you're talking about, or alternative solvency. And the alternative is what says it provides the solution for the problem. It says, all right, instead of passing the affirmative plan and continuing to operate in the world of capitalism that will eventually kill us all because we don't like to think about it, we should instead focus on, it can be something like micro wars, or it can be something like the individual power to resist capitalism. In that it says we should resist capitalism at any and every instance that we confront it, that we face it. And that might, in this round, against the affirmative team, it might be the affirmative plan. And if the affirmative plan furthers capitalism, furthers capitalistic structures, we should say no, get that mess out of here. Instead, we're going to focus on ways that we can break free from capitalism.
So our impact, or our solvencies, alternatives, that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Do those come in specific and generic as well, just like links do?
Yeah. And most of the time, you'll see that, like, a lot of times, for what I've seen at least, the alternative is just to reject the plan and the mindset of the plan. So, yeah, it can be as simple as that.
So generic ones won't necessarily go over worse as long as they're well-reasoned.
Alternatives there are a lot of alternatives, right?
Yeah.
And some of them still have not been actualized, and these just happen to be older. So generic alternatives, they work well depending on how you spin them. Like, the cards are one part of the debate, but most of the debate relies on the arguments, the way that you explain.
Yeah.
Because your judge is not going to hear all of the words in the card, remember them, and be able to articulate them. But rather, you are supposed to be able to do something.
So as long as you can articulate how a generic
applies to the app.
Yeah, applies better to the app.
And what's your name over here with the gray sweater? What's your name?
Oh, I'm Michaela.
Michaela? What, can you pick one one of the three aspects of a critique and tell us what it is?
So you're talking about from like the link in I don't really know how to explain what a link is, honestly. Like
What do you remember? And then we'll ask someone else in the crowd to help you.
well, it's basically just like
And if you're having problems, think about what the link is and a disadvantage, and that'll help you to remember.
What is a link in the world outside of debate? What does a link do? Okay, so now make it relevant to debate.
What might it connect with a criticism about capitalism? What things are being connected? Is the negative team trying to create this connection? A link like a chain has two ends. What are the two?
like
Can someone else help her out with what a link is?
Sort of means like just a reminder that
Oh, he.
what makes it relative to the affirmative.
Yes, it is. You were saying the same thing? Sweet. And then someone can explain what an impact is in terms of criticism?
it's the harms of whatever you're critiquing. Like if you're talking about the problems of capitalism, it's the problems of capitalism.
And then alternative solvency for criticism. Does anyone remember what an alternative is? Yeah, exactly. So it's
Instead of the plan, we're going to do this.
link. How does the plan further X being whatever you're criticizing, impact? What harms are going to happen as a result of furthering capitalism? And then alternative solvency. What can we do within this debate space, the round, or within the context of policy making in order to solve or resolve capitalism? Those are the three parts of criticism. And when you respond to a criticism, you're going to do the same like you would do with a disad. You're going to say no link, no impact, and your alt doesn't solve. This is on a very basic yes, no, world of the app, world of the bank side of it.
And a lot of times when you have an alternative that just simply says reject the plan, you can make the argument that the affirmative plan does more than what
Because
the
it's not-
alternative is.
It's not just saying like get rid of it. It's actually saying here's something we can do.
Exactly.
Right.
And you can also turn that once you know. If you have the pieces of evidence with you, then you can turn that you solved it as well.
You all have your laptops. Can you very quickly pull them out? Go to open evidence and then look for either neoliberalism or capitalism critique.
We gotta
Download the first file.
Also in your
I know our time is dwindling.
yes, yes.
Miss
Some
Brown.
people have to go. They have to get on the bus and just.
Where do I go, Miss Brown? I just typed in open evidence.
If
And
you
if you don't have your laptop, ask your neighbor next to you if they can be so gracious as to let you look at it. So I can talk to you all day about what a criticism is, but it's much more important for you to take the time to read a criticism so that you can see it for yourself.
Is there like a reason why some debaters don't really like critiques?
So
tell them about the whole Kansas world, that Kansas mentality.
Basically, just a lot of people are like stuck in the traditional ways of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And just like how I told you how it was intimidating for me, it's intimidating for some judges, and also like it's kind of like a slap in the face, and it's scary for some people to realize that we have these systematic problems that are like issues on just more than just like a city scale, but like this is a global issue. A lot of times people can't grasp that, or they don't want to. They'd much rather talk about the fluffy stuff like traditional policy debate, whereas we have a structure of, oh, this is the plan, we do or we don't want to do this, rather than critiquing like something huge like capitalism. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And another reason why people don't necessarily, So K's are not an easy thing to learn.
Right.
Because it requires you to have a background knowledge on a very particular subject of scholarship. And this scholarship is different than reading a Newsweek article, an economist article, cutting cards. It's cutting cards from books, it's cutting cards from literature, from very particular authors. So it can be very work intensive to run a criticism. And that you have to have a certain threshold of how this structure operates in our world in order to articulate to the judge how it operates in relation to this environment. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But I cannot kid you, it's the most rewarding body of literature. It's the most rewarding school of thought to dive into personally. Because through debate, I've found personal liberation, not necessarily through articles talking about nuclear war, but much more so reading books or scholarship that talks to me about anti-blackness. And what are the particular reasons why I might feel a certain way if someone calls me black versus African American, or why this person has a particular privilege that they're leveraging against me in my daily interaction. So criticisms are like, I cannot kid you, any hour, any minute of work that you put into debate, especially criticism, you're going to get back to the person. So criticisms are like, it's a hard cookie. It's like a safe you have to crack. Once you get in there, it's always.
Should you always, like, as a negative strategy, should you always run a critique? Or only when it's necessary, that you feel it's necessary?
I think that it depends on how comfortable you are with it. I definitely don't think that you should just assume that since you run a critique that you're going to win.
Yeah.
You have to understand it 100%. You have to see how well the negative team actually links to it, or how well the affirmative team actually does link to it, because they can take your K down in 2 seconds, and then it's like, why did you just waste your whole one NC talking about something that wasn't relevant?
I would say that criticism, so there are different levels of your career as a debater. There's the place where you're like, what is a K? And then you go out there and you discover, oh, this is what a K is. Then you get to the point, I want to run a K. Then you read what Ks are, you start to run critiques. And then you get to a point you're like, I love Ks. The rest of the debate is fake. I'm not running a K, and I'm not talking about real world. All of you are fakers. Ha 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 ha. You should be running a K too. And then you get to a point where you're like, all of these are arguments that I have the option to run. I'm going to run whatever gives me the chance to win. And some people are like, I'm going to take the moral stance in this debate round in order to talk about the things that I love, the things that will give sustenance to other people, understanding to other people, the things that will help liberate other people. And that's all I'm going to talk about. But at the beginning, you have to run a critique a certain number of times, a certain number of practice rounds to understand how it functions. Because capitalism is a very particular critique that you can manipulate in a very good way where you'll win majority of the rounds if you articulate it correctly. So it's working up these articulations, working up these strategies with it, getting familiar with it, and then also getting to the point where you don't fear anyone coming in and debating your criticism. Because you're like, yo, I've ran this like for 12 months. I know my critique. I know every card that there is written on it. I've read 4 books on this critique. And you want to tell me how it doesn't link to your plan? We'll try again. So it's just like, it depends on what point you're at with criticism. But like Ms. Brown's trying to do, you can't, if you're afraid of criticisms, you won't step into the world of them. If you don't step into the world, then you can't be blessed by the word of criticism.
Okay. And then, like, when you go in a round and you're running negative, do you just go up and say, I'm running a critique and read on? Or is there, like, a certain way that you run it in a round?
So, debate is freedom. It's the only place that it's freedom within structure. I say this in that you can do whatever you want to do in the debate round as long as you know how to do it respectfully and you have intentions set. So I say this meaning you can get up there and you don't have to say nothing to them. And you can start reading your card. You can say whatever you want that's on the card. You can read the stick cards with a bunch of words. You can do that. Or you can get up there and you can say, all right, this plan sounds like a really good idea. And I also think that it could potentially resolve some of these problems. There's a whole other aspect that we're not taking into consideration when it comes to the affirmative case. And that is, I know, especially if you have a conservative judge.
I was just about to say, in you all situations, I definitely feel like with the types of judges that you get, that you should break it down before just reading it because it's intimidating to just throw a lot of information on them and just assume that they're going to know how that's supposed to help them vote in the round, especially if they're like, well, the affirmative team's plan actually sounds pretty good. What are they talking about capitalism for? You have to make sure that you make that link very understandable and that you compare the impacts and the harms and things that are throughout the debate round so that it makes sense in a way that even the most conservative of judges, the most traditional judges can understand what you're saying and still vote for you.
That's for the weekend. We have the best judges in DKC.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, if you go up in DKC, you say you're about to run a K, they'll probably smile.
Excited.
Yeah.
It depends on your judges, and you should ask about their experience.
You're good. Weeknights, you're good. Weekends, be careful.
You should ask what their paradigms are. They say they're tabula rasa. Still be skeptical. Because I had a good number of people that say they're tabula rasa and they're really like conservative policy. Right, no, that's not the case. People like to say that. It's like saying all of us are equal. Racism.
I don't see color.
I don't see color.
So you don't stop at a red light, like.
So that you have to be careful with.
Okay.
But that's what the judges experience.
So
no matter what, it's always best to like. Stories are the number one way to communicate.
Yeah.
If you start with the story of the critique and in the world of the affirmative, or the world of the affirmative in the critique, which is a smarter way, then you give the judge a tool to understand the words that you're going to say in your car.
okay.
And this is kind of the gateway to opening their mind to be prepared to receive the blessing that you're going to bestow. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and it's just the same way with any other, even out, like, if you learn how to run a K good, you're going to learn how to run anything else better. Like, in that, once you learn how to run a criticism really, really well, you'll know how to run a disad very well, or a counterpoint. Because there's a particular train of logic of manipulation that you use when you're working with criticisms that you don't have the same freedom when it comes to disads. And then when you come back, you apply that to disads.
Okay.
Good questions.
Does anybody else have, like, Jalen, I know you have, like, the goddess of the
I know.
I'm getting like the basics of it.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm ready to run one yet, but
Miss Brown, you think me and Ryan would be ready to run a critique?
And again, it depends on your judge, and not only that, if you like, you're in open right now, like jump up to these guys.
Mm.
And have you ran a K in practice?
No, I haven't run one at all.
The best thing to do right first is to get you a little squad of 4 people or 6 people that are interested in running criticism. And then just take the time. I wish I had more time now, but I try to get you all to download a K file. Because once you have that little file downloaded, you get curious.
Yeah.
Once you click and open it, and you start to say, I don't know what these words are. I don't know what this card is saying. Then you get to Googling what the words are, what this means. And then once you get to the point of being curious about it, you all can be curious together,
Okay.
learn them together, and you can run them against each other. That's the most. You shouldn't test the K. You wouldn't test a new affirmative in the field before you've had a practice.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You would do the same with criticism. You take the criticism like a child. You bring it into a nice little playground with other children. Let it run around and play with those children. And if your child gets beat up, well, you got to take the child back and teach it.
You gotta teach
Exactly. Get up, dust yourself off. You're fine.
Exactly.
Why are you crying?
And that's what happens with the world of criticism. Is that you need a safe environment with Ms. Brown, knowledge to help bring you into this world of criticism, to get you familiarized with it. And then you can go out into the semi-real world, whether that be open or whether that be just having a practice round with another team from a different school. And then you can get further acclimated. It's just like, how comfortable do you need to feel in order to run this K in the practice round? If you have people that are like, whatever, I'm going out there and I'm gonna run it. And then you have people that are like, I'd like to practice with it. And it's all up to you, because no loss is a bad loss, unless you don't learn from it. If you take an L and you walk away and you forget it, you took an L. But if you take an L, you go back into the crib, you break that L down, you look at it with a microscope, you rearrange it, you got a W. Because you took the time to sit with your losses and understand, what was it that I could have done better? And if you do that, then you will do better the next time that you run. But if you don't, then you're not. And you're going to be like, why am I losing all the time? I don't understand. Well, you haven't done anything with it.
And And like Mylan was saying, it's important to understand their critique, but it's really important to understand the arguments that they're going to say against your critique. So you don't just want to analyze, okay, what is this critique? What does it mean? What are the parts? Okay, I have it in front of me. I know what that means. You also have to understand they're going to answer your critique, and how are you going to then come back from that? So you have to understand what the affirmative can say against your critique. So then you can answer that, because if you run your critique, you understand it, everything, then they come back and they answered, and you're like, well, dang, that sounded kind of good. Then they're voting for the negative team right there, because you don't even know how to respond to their answers to your critique.
Yeah, any other questions? Do you have any other curiosities with criticism? Things that you know that you've seen, you're like, why do they do that? Why do they do that?
And as you know, it'll make more sense once you get to debate critiques, and once you get to see it and experience it, then it'll all come together for what we're telling you.
Okay. I'm a junior.
Critique double bound.
You said what?
Critique double bound.
Are you talking like double bind?
Uh,
So a double bind is like, a double bind is, it's a very smart way to say you're gonna lose, but you get to choose which way you want to lose. So this is good for the person that's saying it, bad for the person on the other end. It says
Either you're this or you're this.
Right.
Either way, you lose.
So it's like saying, here's what they say. You'll say, either you link to the criticism and you trigger the impacts, or you don't link to the criticism, but the alternative solves the affirmative plan better than your affirmative plan. Does that make sense? And this is where the debater will say, Judge, they're in a double bind. Either they link, they trigger the impacts, they've had no responses to the impacts, which means that there's no point in doing the out, because it will create a net worse world. Or they don't link to the criticism, and the alternative solves the affirmative plan better than their plan, which means there's no reason to pass the plan in the first place when you can pass the world of the criticism. But you can't do that at the same time that you are attempting to pass the affirmative plan. Does that make sense?
You had your hand up. I didn't forget about you. You had a question.
Oh yeah. Earlier you said you knew how to end a debate round in the first 10 seconds.
Yeah, I did say that. I mean, in all honesty, it's about how you read your opponent.
Our baby.
So you're in the first 10 seconds, you're gonna get the arguments that they're gonna want. But you have to be able to look at your opponent and see, honestly, whether or not they're confident enough to not let you run over them, or if they're incompetent enough to let you run over them. And you can make a quick decision after hearing them in the first 10 seconds, whether or not you can do things like read much faster than them, read a bunch of things that won't make sense to them, or read arguments that are just better than yours. And that's how you win the first 10 seconds, is you beat them.
Because you already set those arguments up.
Okay.
It's just like, debate is a mental game. The cards don't really matter. They honestly just don't. Like, I could come in, like, Dasia, I could come in here, y'all can read your whole app. I will come in here with no cards. Dasia will come in here with no cards. We'll sit up here, ask you questions. You'll lose the process. Or we'll get into the speech. We'll break down every card and how it doesn't make sense in terms of what you're trying, the argument you're trying to make. And we'll get up there and give a dang good, convincing speech that would make the judge feel like the plan's like.
Evidence is one thing, but knowing how to be persuasive in the round and breaking arguments apart and setting up arguments outside of the evidence, or even an extension of what your cards are saying, is definitely a lot more. Because I can come up here and read 50 cards that are from yesterday, and it doesn't mean anything if Mylan comes up here and says, this card is trash, this is problematic because of this doesn't make sense because of this.
And if you explain it to the judge in a better way, in a way that they're going to understand you better than they understand the other opponent. Debate is like the art of, honestly, debate is the art of manipulation of words. That's what debate is. That's what lawyers do. That's what business people do. And you have to understand how other people are susceptible to these manipulations or not. That's how you understand, quickly break down who your opponent is after they've opened it. Or but if you do it before they open their mouth, you might as well sign a ballot. But that's the situation. What grade are you in?
9.
Okay,
Yeah,
you got time.
It's like, honestly, it's like a thing that you'll pick up. You'll be like, oh, these people are trash. Write the arguments, and then you're like, ugh. Judge, exciting battle right.
What was that me in the 5th round when she started talking about Hurricane Irma and Harvey? That was weird.
No, she said that was her.
Oh, you rookie.
No.
No, she said that was
Okay.
her when they brought
So
up her
me
case.
and Ryan, our app is sexual education, and so we're all like, we need to improve it. Here's some cards, and so the negative, it's a pretty hard like topic to go against, and the only thing you can somewhat really do is federalism, and so they came up and they're like, we do need sexual education, but what we need to worry about right now is Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Harvey. And so they tried to run a topicality on us on the word increase, and then I shut them down. And then they were like, we're gonna take away that topicality because they proved that they're topical, and we're like, yeah, I know. It was a whole lot of mess.
Yeah,
That's real goofy.
if someone comes up and says, okay, I'd be like, okay.
I was about to say, that's red herring right there. That's a logical fallacy. That don't have nothing to do with what we're talking about right now.
That's when you hit them with the okay.
And then I answered back to it with, I read an impact calc about like 98 seconds someone will experience sexual assault, and in a day it's going to go up to 570 people. And so they offered this kind of plan, like, okay, we should take your plan but move it up a month. And so I asked her, so you are okay with 17,110 people being sexually assaulted in a month? And she was like,
Tell me what.
and she's like, I'm not okay with that, but like we have to move it up. I'm like, that means you're in support of it. And so I basically shut their whole thing down. And it was funny because they came afterwards. They're like, you guys were so good. And like, thank you for saying that. Like, we were struggling. I was like, it's okay. We did the same thing when we had to go neg on that.
Honestly, like, it's one of those things where it's just like, the world is not that finite of capital. Where it's like, we have to either resolve Hurricane Harvey, Irma in a day, or sexual assault. We can teach our kids about it. I'm like, in the same day, do you know what is happening?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how many pieces of legislation are signed? In the same day, do you know how many different politicians are working on X, Y, Z? They're telling me the judge can't either A, do both, or B, make a consideration for something longer than these next 2 months. Like, that's just not how it works.
And then they were trying to come after us, saying like, we're not, our plan is not going to have as much impact. People are not going to like stop immediately raping. And I answered back, change does take time. But one example of that is the civil rights movement and how it took time for us to be where we are now, for you to be in this room right now, for me to be debating right now. Change, it starts small, but over time it goes big. So
And the argument that you can make that me and Latara learned, because they would say that to us too. Oh, your plan, you might be trying to solve for something long term, but this isn't something that's going to happen right away. Your plan is comparatively advantageous to the status quo, because right now nobody's doing anything right now to solve the problem, or they're barely doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So if your plan can even solve for 1% of what you're claiming that your advantages are, you won the round.
Yep.
And that's what you can tell them.
That's all the affirmative. That's the burden of the affirmative.
Yep.
You have the burden of truth, and then negative has the burden of class. And your truth, you have those burdens, but you also have to provide something that's advantageous to the status.
That's what we started saying, girl, write that down. Tell your judge that the plan is comparatively advantageous to the status quo. And when you say that and break it down and tell them what that means, it's proven that you're basically saying the status quo, where so many people are, you have all your statistics, all these things are happening. If we plan that we solve for at least 1% of that, you should go app, because we're at least lessening all the harm, the rapes and the miseducation and stuff like that.
Okay.
There you go.
Megan. Miss Brown, like freshman year, she like kept on talking at you. I was like, who's Mylan?
That's awesome.
Miss Brown, do you want me to end it?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I appreciate your interest, though. Seriously.
Did I get it?